Hey y'all, it's St. Pam again. Some of you may know that I was on a podcast last Saturday about immersion and role playing. Some of the focus was on features that would help with both. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. These are just some features I would love to see implemented in more MMOs, so let's get started. I do want to start off by saying that some MMOs allow for mods, and some of the things on this list can be accomplished that way. However, you will often see multiple mods that do the same thing but are not compatible with one another. There are also times when the mod is abandoned completely. So it would be best that the devs include it. However, I also understand that they may not want to devote the time or resources to it. There are also some features that would be good for everyone, not just for role players. So first off, I'm going to start off with seating. If you are going to include benches, chairs, pillows, etc., then please make them usable. I can't even begin to tell you how frustrating it is to want to sit but be unable to. We see this in EQ too. You can place chairs in your homes and guild halls, or you'll see chairs out in the world in taverns and the like, but you're not able to use them. They're just there for show. Whereas in World of Warcraft, there are very few chairs that you cannot use. It's still a little annoying to find the one chair that you can't use, but it's a minor issue when compared with games that don't allow you to sit in any of the chairs. Next up is placeable tents. This is something I didn't even know that I wanted until a couple of days ago. Now that I've seen it though, I want it to be the norm. Having tents that you can put up yourself can have a couple of benefits. For non-role players and role players alike, it could provide a minor boost or allow you to recover hit points more quickly. In addition to that, players that want to be out in the field could do so more realistically in their role playing. Guilds could erect tent cities and RP while having to remain alert and ready for an enemy attack. I think it would be a great addition. I was recently introduced to it because WoW has tents that you can buy in your garrison, but I had no idea. I played in Warlords of Draenor, but I had no clue that you could get these. Unfortunately, they changed it so that they can only be used in Draenor. You used to be able to place them anywhere in the game. No one really knows why this change was made. They would have been a great asset for role-playing anywhere in Azeroth, and this is something that I really hope that they change back. I mean, they only give you a rested boost, and that's really not all that much. You can get that by just going into a city and sitting in an inn for a little bit. So I don't really understand why this change was made. Alright, so now let's talk about languages, or more importantly, the ability to learn new ones. This was one of my favorite features in EQ2, but sadly I haven't seen it anywhere else. I'm sure other games have included it, but I haven't seen it. I can understand it to an extent in games that focus heavily on PvP or RVR. Cross-faction communication could be nightmarish, especially on non-role-playing realms, where maybe all they do is hurl insults at one another. However, players should be allowed to learn the languages for their faction even on those games. As an example, why wouldn't some orcs be able to speak Zandali after so many years in such close contact with the Dark Spear? Or why wouldn't you eventually be able to learn the Blood Elf language? I don't even know what it is. But why wouldn't you be able to learn it? It doesn't make any sense. I can understand, okay, you really don't want us to speak with the Alliance. Fine, whatever. Doesn't really make sense since World of Warcraft is actually not super heavily focused on PvP. There are PvP elements, but it's not super heavily focused on that. It's more about the story of the big bad thing that you're fighting. So, I don't know. However, they have recently, with the Demon Hunters, allowed cross-faction communication between them. Demon Hunters can talk to each other. They didn't even do that with the Pandarians, so there's hope there. Now this could be done via quest chain, books, etc., whatever it is. Maybe you have to get exalted with a faction to be able to start learning it. And that would be acceptable to me. You know, you go to a faction vendor and buy a book after you've gained exalted with them. This would help both in role-playing and in immersion. Armor customization is the next one that I want to talk about. This is another one that I think everyone would like. It's also something that could take several different forms. It could come in the form of dyes, like in Dayak, Ion, Guild Wars 2, and so many others. You could also have outfits you wear over your armor. EQ2 did this. I think Ion may have had a version of this, but I can't really remember. It's been a little while since I've played that one. There are probably others that do this as well, but just aren't coming to me right now. WoW does have transmogrification, which is a similar concept, but completely replaces the appearance of your armor. So it's not like in EQ2 where you have your appearance armor and then your actual armor. You have to go to someone and actually pay them to change what your armor set looks like, which is, you know, that's fine. Unfortunately, you can't change the color, so you still have to try to find armor that at least somewhat matches. Some games use a combination of these. Any option would be great for role players and non-role players alike because it can be really frustrating to be stuck in an armor set that you hate. It also seems to be becoming more commonplace, so I don't really think this is something that we have to worry about too much, as it's something that's been in games for a little while already and people like, and more games seem to be doing it. So this is probably going to be across the board for most games. Another feature, perhaps one of the most important for role players, is a built-in space for character biographies, descriptions, you know. I can only think of 2 games that has something like this. One of those is Lord of the Rings Online, and if I remember right, EverQuest 2 does as well. Now this is something that can be done with mods. World of Warcraft does that. But having the option in-game would ensure compatibility. That's my biggest concern with this being made by modders. World of Warcraft has TRP 2 and 3. My role play, there was Flag RSP back in the day. I don't think that's even a thing anymore. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's a thing anymore. For a while, I don't think my RP and TRP 2 were compatible, but they are now. So that's the thing. Eventually, some of them did become compatible, but not all of them will. And there's probably others that I don't even know about, but my roleplay in TRP 2 and 3 are the more common ones. Some, again, may work with one another, others don't. Flag RSP, I don't think ever worked with anything else. It only worked with Flag RSP for as long as it was around. Again, I haven't really seen it, so I don't know if it's even being used anymore. But still, having a built-in system bypasses that and ensures that we can find other role players easily. Libraries and journals. Libraries would be great for a lot of reasons. The most obvious, of course, is having most, if not all, of the in-game lore, like in-game books, for the setting in one or a few places, depending on how many libraries there are. Maybe it's just all the lore for that faction is in that library, and the other faction has to go to their library, or you may be able to find some of their books out in the wild, so to speak. Anyone that is interested in a game's lore could appreciate that. Role player or not, they could appreciate it. Maybe they're waiting for their group and they just decide to read through one of the books while they are. Nothing wrong with that. Role players may also enjoy it as a place to gather information in character, or for a bookish character to spend their time. Journals come into this as a way to chronicle your server's overall storyline, as any server is going to have their own separate storyline, and even non-role players may like this to track the achievements of specific guilds. It could track a guild story or even an individual player's. That can be a great tool for old and new players alike to find out what's going on their server in their faction. Emotes will always be something that players want. I would, however, like to see this taken a step further. First off, it's a huge boon to have animated emotes, even more than it is voiced, I think. Voiced emotes can be fun, like the jokes and flirts in World of Warcraft, and being able to say that you're out of mana and have a verbal cue to other people in your party that's useful to everyone. But more importantly than that to me is the ability to lean against a wall, or if you're going to play a violin, have one actually come out. Ion did that one, I think. Actually, Ion had some interesting ones. I don't currently have it downloaded, so I can't really show you, but Ion did have some interesting emotes and animations to go along with them. So yes, I'd much rather see my character doing some of these actions than me just typing it out and your imagination having to be used from there, and then if someone else comes in, they don't know what you're actually doing. If you're leaning against a wall, well, they may not know that, you're just standing there. So that's just an example. There's also facial emotes, and what I mean by this is if you're going to say your character is smiling or raising an eyebrow or whatever the case is, maybe if you can animate that. I mean, we've seen with games like World of Warcraft where some of the actions and emotes actually change your character's features. So I'd kind of like to see this become more commonplace. I understand that may take a lot of resources and it may not be viable for all games, but it would be nice to see that becoming more commonplace. Guild and player housing also come to mind. Now, I do have another video about that with the dangers that involves player housing, because instance housing and guild housing can make a world feel empty. I've also heard some complaints about this with the garrison. Because of all the resources they gave you in the garrison, it kind of made the world outside of it feel emptier than it should have while you were in Draenor. So instance housing is always an issue. However, that's only if you really go overboard with that. It can be a boon. They can give you a place to customize to your own or your guild's taste. If the house or guild hall is not instanced, then it could give an opportunity for random events. For example, in Camelot Unchained, it's going to be an RVR game, and people are going to be able to burn your house down or your guild hall down or something like that. So that can provide an interesting and unique RP opportunity that you don't really see in a lot of other games, because that's not a possibility. So yeah, if in Camelot Unchained, if all goes as is planned, and we don't see any reason for it not to at this point, you may be in your guild hall having a meeting and suddenly find that your guild hall's on fire around you and being overrun by enemies. And how is that not a way to drive your RP forward, to change your guild story? You know, you may have to roleplay getting more resources later as well. It's interesting, I think, an interesting aspect. Now, on the other hand, if it is instanced, you could find yourself with some unique and interesting options. These options could include choosing your own music, the weather, and maybe even the time of day, depending on how far the game company wants to go with it. I'm certain that this is difficult, but I have actually seen it done. EQ2 has at least 2-player houses, maybe more, that give you similar options. One of them is actually a ship that, from your perspective, seems to be going through the water. Like it seems to actually be in motion. It's swaying. The lamps that are already hung in the house are moving. It's very cool. But you go up to the steering wheel and you get some options for music and weather. And it's really cool. There's I think a haunted house that gives you option for weather, but I don't think it gives you the options for music. But it's still cool. Really enjoy it. None of these gave you options for time of day. That's something that I just added on because I think it would be cool. Some people are never able to role play during the daytime, but they may actually want to have a daytime RP scene or whatever for the storyline, and it would be cool if that option were given, but it's definitely not a requirement, just would be really, really cool. Alright, and lastly, I think official events are great. These can take many forms as well, such as holidays, like in WoW we have Hollow's End, there's their Thanksgiving one that's going to be coming up this month, and there's going to be Christmas, and they have Children's Week, and so on and so forth. They have a lot of, well, they have quite a few. They've got their Midsummer Festival, things like that. So that can be really cool for giving depth to the world, because there's no reason to think that the civilians in the game wouldn't have holidays that they celebrate around harvest time, around the equinox, things like that, just like forever. It's been happening pretty much for all of human history, so there's no reason to think that it wouldn't happen in the game world as well. So this can give depth to it, help drive RP a little bit, because you may want to do some little things dealing with those events. So there's that, but you can also have real-time events. A mix is honestly the best in my opinion. Now by real-time events I mean things like what you see in EQ or used to see. I don't know if they do it anymore. I haven't played it for a little while, but you see or used to see guides going around doing random events in the cities. Maybe it's games, maybe they have you go do quests. They almost always require that you role play with them. Or if you do role play with them, you'll get an extra little gift. So it's really cool. It's not something that they do just on role-playing servers. I was a guide on a non-role-playing server myself. But a lot of people surprisingly did role play with me because they kind of understood by that point, I think, how it worked. And the guides were a volunteer force. They just were given free game time for donating their own time. And yeah, they did these events. They had to do them so many hours or so many events a week. So that kept a pretty good influx coming in. These could be hosted by either a volunteer force like that, or by GMs. Again, I think a mix is best. That way all the work isn't on the GMs and they can concentrate on other things, but maybe do more major events that could involve the actual storyline. Something else that these real-time events could involve would be, for example, large-scale PvP battles that the guild masters track across all of the servers and use that data to decide or figure out who the most powerful realm is overall, and then push the storyline forward that way. Kind of like Games Workshop, does, or at least used to do, with their tournaments. I think that's a great way to go about it. And this is something that could be, again, used from both roleplay and non-roleplay servers to help determine how the storyline gets, you know, how it moves forward, what the direction is. I think it adds a more interesting dynamic feel to it, and can actually maybe take the storyline in a way that the game developers and writers didn't expect. These type of events can also introduce people who aren't really familiar with roleplay. Maybe they know about it, but they don't really know what the point of it is, or haven't participated in it, maybe because none of their friends do. And so it can introduce them to it and let them see a way to enjoy the game that maybe they haven't before, and that's always a good thing. And if it draws more people to become role players, well, I think that's a good thing too. Anyway, that's all that I have for now. If you have anything to add, then please share in the comments below. Maybe I've missed something, it's possible. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my husband who gave me a few ideas for this for this video as well. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and I also hope that you all have a great night.